Chisa has been out for a couple of days now, and I think I've had enough time to fully form my opinion on her. So let's talk about it. First I want to talk about Chisa's performance in Tower, then her performance in Whimpering Wastes, and then finally I want to talk about the points in my pros and cons video to see if I was right about them or not. So first let's talk about her performance in Tower. And honestly, I do have some things to note here, but my main issue with Chisa is actually not one relating to her performance. But I would like to start with talking about how she feels on her own in a vacuum. So first of all, her opener rotation, it is fine. Something important for every third slot character is how good their opening rotation is going to be. Because you can either have a character like Verena who feels basically no different at all, or you end up playing a character that feels really bricked without their intro skill. So this is actually an important factor. Chisa has a very different rotation from her basic rotation, and sometimes I do feel a little bit of jank if I get interrupted mid-combo, but outside of that, it's fine. So yeah, there's no real issues here. I will say that normally I would like to be able to swap out before I actually hit my Saw Blade Eradication, but you know what, sometimes this just isn't going to work out. You're gonna need maybe a dodge or two to actually get enough Concerto to do that, but even without it, it's not that big of a time loss, and it's really only for people who want to really optimize their gameplay, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Overall, her rotation feels very smooth, and this also extends to her loop rotation. She doesn't really have many issues with getting interrupted, so yeah, that's very nice to see. Sometimes you will get interrupted, but this isn't exactly going to ruin the rotation. You're simply just gonna have to start your combo over again, which could waste some time, but well, it's not as punishing as some other characters. If you get interrupted during Choyuen's heavy attacks, it's a lot more punishing than getting interrupted as Chisa, for example. One issue that I do feel with Chisa in Tower of Adversity is during multi-wave floors. You see, for Chisa's buffing, as well as Havoc Bane's debuffing, Chisa has to apply a mark onto enemies. And this can mean that if you kill an enemy wave, it means you're not gonna end up getting the mark on the next wave. Now, I did spread a bit of misinformation in my last video, which I apologize for, which is that Chisa's mark won't really carry over in Whimpering Wastes, but Whimpering Wastes is actually the mode where it is accounted for. This is because whenever an enemy dies, Chisa will be able to reapply the mark onto the enemies that spawn. This works excellently in Whimpering Wastes, but it's not really that good in Tower. So if you kill a wave of enemies and then the boss spawns in, you will not have Chisa's mark on them. Which means you're losing out on not only the 18% Def Ignore, but also on the Dev Shred from Havoc Bane, which can be pretty annoying within Tower. That's the only real nitpick I have with Chisa in Tower, as long as we're talking about her in a vacuum. If we're not talking about a vacuum, then we start running into some more issues. The primary one being the one that I already anticipated in my pros and cons video, which is that she doesn't really feel like that much of an upgrade over the Rovers at S0 or 1. With Zani in particular, her signature weapon doesn't even work for Zani, which is just absolutely absurd, because Zani actually doesn't apply negative status. She only applies Heliacal Ember, which isn't a negative status, which means that Zani is not capable of benefiting from Chisa's signature weapon. I don't understand why they made the signature weapon have to apply negative status, instead of just either apply negative status or deal negative status, because that's how her outro skill works. Why couldn't her weapon have worked that way? But that aside, this means that Chisa isn't actually the best in slot for Zani. She's not even the second best in slot. She is literally worse than Shorekeeper and Spectre Rover. I haven't tested Verena out yet, but I'm assuming that Verena is either going to be on par with Chisa or maybe even a little bit better. So yeah, when it comes to Zani, Chisa is just not it. With Cardathea, I did notice an increase in my damage output, but I'm not gonna say it was really that major. Chisa is just overall not that big of an upgrade, which I feel is her biggest issue right now. There's just not really a team that really wants her. But that brings me to Whimpering Wastes. And in Whimpering Wastes, Chisa, it's really similar to Tower actually. It's almost the same, in fact. Chisa is gonna suffer no issues when it comes to interruption, and her rotation should be going by just fine every single time. And much like in Tower, she really doesn't feel like a major upgrade for Cardathea, while still also just not being an upgrade for Zani at all. So, nothing is really different here, but I guess I can go more in depth in how she works in Multiwave, because whenever an enemy dies, Chisa will reapply her mark to every single enemy that's currently alive, which means that as long as there is an infinite supply of enemies, Chisa's mark should theoretically never run out. But the issue is that within Whimpering Wastes, there will be moments where there is just no enemies on the field, which is primarily going to happen in between waves. If you know how Whimpering Wastes works, first you start off with an army of small mobs, then you're gonna have to fight 3 elites at a time, and then it's 2 elites with a couple of small mobs. These are each counted as waves, where there is a certain amount of elites and a certain amount of small mobs that you have to kill in order to progress to the next wave. And during these waves, there will be no enemies. This moment in between waves, when you're waiting for new enemies to spawn, is also when there is no enemies for Augusta. So if you're an Augusta player who has used her in WhiWa, you will be very familiar with when exactly your Chisa mark is going to be running out. Another thing is that Chisa is capable of grouping, but she's not able to group elites, which is the one thing that I really wanted her to be able to group, specifically the Chop Chops. So unfortunately, Chisa's grouping is a lot less impactful than I thought. But now it's finally talk about the points from my pros and cons video to see if I was right about her or not. First of all, working with every negative status. And while theoretically this is true in her kit, well, we know from practice now that she isn't actually good for Zani. So she doesn't really work with every negative status, she just theoretically works with every negative status, and it depends entirely on what the alternatives are and how the DPS's kit functions. Because if it's a DPS who doesn't apply any negative status themselves, then they're already getting some minus points because they won't be able to use Chisa's signature weapon. So this is only a sort of maybe it depends. As for Chisa's grouping, like I said earlier, it's really not as relevant as I thought, because she isn't capable of grouping the one enemy type that I wanted her to be able to group. So unfortunately, this grouping really isn't that big of a deal when it comes to Chisa's performance. Like, sure, it's a nice bonus, but if you took it away from her kit, you really weren't going to notice. It does help sometimes in Whimpering Wastes and maybe a bit in Tower, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem all that impactful. Then it's time to get to the negatives, being the fact that the Rovers are free and are the perfect alternative against Chisa. And like I've already said in this video, this is still completely true. If you have a good Arrow Rover for your Cardathea, then you don't need Chisa. If you have Spectra Rover for your Zani, then you don't need Chisa. And even if you didn't really know how to capitalize off of Spectra Rover's stack application, Shorekeeper is still better than Chisa when it comes to Zani. So, yeah, it's really hard to justify pulling for this character if you want to be efficient with your pulls. Sure, if you're trying to create the best Cardathea team possible, then yes, get Chisa, she is an upgrade. But if you just want a team that's going to clear the endgame content, and you're really not looking for upgrades, then Chisa is going to be a very easy skip. But those are just my thoughts on Chisa. Let me know what you think of her down in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you have any questions, be sure to check out my Discord server, which is linked in the description. There's a pretty good chance I'll respond since I'm rather active there. If you just want to see more of me, you can check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. But that'll be all from me. Peace.